Hi and welcome again, maybe for the first time. Anyway, you've come to another Murdoch Music Minute. Today, let's talk about Animals by Pink Floyd. This album review contains a bit of George Orwell, social critique, and quite a lot of guitar solos. But before all that, let's clarify once and for all which one is Pink and which one is Floyd in a brief history of the band. Pink Floyd originated from the remains of student days blues bands formed by Roger Waters and Nick Mason. After several name and lineup changes, Syd Barrett, an old childhood friend of Waters from the Cambridge area, joined as guitarist and eventually frontman. In 1965, the band changed to its now famous name, derived by Barrett from the names of two of his favorite blues musicians, Pink Anderson and Floyd Council. The band soon found a committed manager in Peter Jenner and became more and more of a spearhead of the psychedelic underground scene of swinging London. Syd Barrett started writing whimsical and highly creative originals and proved to be a mesmerizing frontman. After two first successful singles in the UK, Pink Floyd released their groundbreaking debut album Piper at the Gates of Dawn in 1967. Syd Barrett's mental condition was, however, quickly declining. His regular intake of huge quantities of LSD seemed to have deeply troubling effects and brought on ever-increasing erratic behavior by Syd, not unlike stages of depression or schizophrenia. Having been forced to cancel several gigs and even a US tour, an attempt was made to relieve Barrett from the pressure by introducing a second guitarist to the band, David Gilmour. Yet, as difficulties and unpredictableness with Barrett continued, at one point the band members simply did not pick him up for a gig anymore, and finally both sides agreed that Syd would leave the band. With their creative mastermind lost in the haze of hallucinogenic drugs and mental breakdown now, Pink Floyd had to find their way and sound anew. What followed could be called a transitional and tentatively experimental tryout phase of a good 3 to 4 years. During that period, the remaining band members had to grow into their own as songwriters and redefine their sound. They released their most avant-garde albums during that period, including A Saucerful of Secrets in 1968, which was an attempt to copy the strange, whimsical mood of the debut, but largely without Syd. The deliberately out there and experimental Ummagumma in 1969, an attempt to bring together space rock and symphonic sounds on Atom Heart Mother in 1970, as well as more loose and varied soundtrack works. Pink Floyd finally arrived as a band for bigger audiences with 1971's Meddle, which soon should be surpassed by their Dark Side of the Moon, an album that since its release in 1973 has been regarded not only one of the best prog rock albums of all time, but is also the most successful rock album of all times in general. Pink Floyd, despite their psychedelic and avant-garde roots and their strong conceptual approach, suddenly had become giants of classic rock and of arena concerts. Not surprisingly, it was a challenge for the band to come up with material for the follow-up to Dark Side of the Moon, the album that figuratively seemed to eclipse everything else in their career. Climate within the band became difficult. However, the resulting work, Wish You Were Here, an album reflecting the band members' grief over the decline of Syd Barrett, but also cynical disillusionment with the music business, was soon hailed as another masterpiece. Where to go from there? Rifts were appearing within the band. Richard Wright faced personal problems in his marriage, while David Gilmour fought with Roger Waters over material to be included on the next album. By that point, bass player and vocalist Roger Waters gained more and more the sole control over direction and content of the band's projects. 1977's Animals was largely Waters' brainchild. a dark and angry album consisting of only 5 tracks that were inspired by George Orwell's Animal Farm and focused predominantly on criticism of class society and social injustice in capitalism. Despite its heavyweight content, the album is probably best known for Letting a Pig Fly. Yes, I guess a lot of you know the iconic album sleeve, one of many iconic album covers by Pink Floyd. Animals shows the Battersea Power Station in London, and if you look closely, there is a pig flying above the power station. And a huge inflatable pig was also an integral part of the live shows during the tour for this album. And now that we are all hyped up for gritty politics, the album Animals opens with an acoustic love ballad, gently sung by Roger Waters. Pigs on a Wing frames the meatier, lengthy tracks on this album and may seem slightly insignificant, especially if you are used to the slow-building epic album openers on other Pink Floyd albums. But this acoustic number provides a little bit of hope and warmth on an otherwise very stern and really angry album, presenting Roger Waters' little animal lore. After this short acoustic introduction, we get Dogs, the only song on the album with writing contributions and vocals by David Gilmour. At 17 minutes, it's also the longest track on the album. It starts with an urgent acoustic guitar chord progression, and then later has a halftime break with rather aggressive soloing by David Gilmour. Guitars are in the front line on this album in general. Dogs stand for the competitive and aggressive businessman or white-collar jobs in general. The uncomfortable atmosphere of the lyrics and the music on Dogs is emphasized by dog barking noises in the background, a lot of electric guitars, as mentioned, and a moody synth break in the middle. The song then returns to its faster opening theme and finally ends with a grave coda describing the rather questionable characteristics of the dogs.
Who was born in a house full of pain? Who was trained not to spit in the fan?
Dogs provide a dramatic and epic introduction to the musical world of Animals, and at the same time almost takes up all of side A. Sarcasm and sneer had already been an integral part of the album Wish You Were Here, but on Animals, Pink Floyd sound angrier than ever before, leaving little room for their more atmospheric and spacey elements. So we are already in the second half of the album, and that begins with the track Pigs, Three Different Ones. This one is about the aristocracy, but most of all politicians, or those in power in general, with a vaguely slow, funky groove, steady cowbell, talkbox guitar, and even a short bass solo. It is the most straightforward rock song on the album.
Pink man, pink man, I should ride you out.
It addresses the cold-hearted bigotry used by those in power to stay in power. A great track. The real highlight on Animals for me, though, is the last of the epics, called Sheep. Like Dogs, this song already existed in an early form and with different lyrics since the tour to the Dark Side of the Moon. On the record, it starts with a very dreamy and tasty e-piano solo by Rick Wright. And then builds up into a very dramatic and galloping track, not unlike One of These Days of Metal. It features outstanding guitar work and spooky synth effects. The sheep here stand for the obedient workers, the meek masses that, however, rise to kill the dogs, only to return to their sheepish routine. The song here breaks into a triumphant guitar chord progression and then ends with pastoral bird and sheep sounds. This is a truly awesome, unfortunately lesser known Pink Floyd track. And with that, we return to Roger Waters strumming Pigs on the Wing Part 2. A slightly conciliatory, but also, I think, ironic ending to what is sometimes referred to as Pink Floyd's punk album.
A shelter from pigs on the wing.
The clash of egos within the band should become even worse in the years after Animals. Animals itself did tremendously well in terms of sales. It went to number 2 in the UK, number 3 in the US, and among several other countries, number 1 in Germany. But compared to the gigantic sales figures of Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here, this was almost a commercial failure. The album is viewed with mixed feelings by the band members, but has gained a cult reputation over the years, with quite a number of Pink Floyd fans claiming that this is their best album and a real underrated masterpiece. Personally, I think Animals shows Pink Floyd as a more unrestrained 4-piece band, really rocking out in the studio, which is really interesting, in contrast to the more carefully constructed, more epic hit albums, Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here. It may not be an immediate masterpiece on first listening, but especially if you've grown tired of being played the Dark Side of the Moon over and over again, then please turn to Animals for a bit of a different, more a spicier flavor in the Pink Floyd catalog. So, thanks for listening to me. You should definitely listen into Animals and stay tuned for more Murdoch Music Minutes.